Right, our next session, as you can see from the screen, is an update from Roy Woodward on the progress with the Hertfordshire Dragonfly Atlas. Roy is county recorder for dragonflies. He's been interested in wildlife for as long as he can remember. Particular interest in dragonflies and damselflies. And just been travelled widely in the UK, also travelled overseas on the hunt. So I will, with that, go to Roy.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Following on from what was said about the water situation, dragonflies are one of the groups of organisms that is generally doing quite well in the UK, but part of that is because the climate's warming up, but that could have some negative effects. This year I've travelled out into sort of the north and west parts of Hertfordshire, walking around a lot of farmland out there, looking for ponds which are on the maps, visible on Google Maps and from recent years. And when I got there, even quite early in the summer, a lot of them were dry or down to just a wet patch of mud. So if we do keep getting dry summers like this, that is going to potentially have an effect on dragonflies and damselflies. So the Hertfordshire Natural History Society did an atlas survey, as I'm sure you all know, of the dragonflies and damselflies in the county in 2000 to 2005. Things have changed a lot since then, so we're doing a new survey, again aiming to cover everything in 6 years to make it as comparable as possible. And that started in 2022 with the intention to be to finish in 2027. Start off with a large red damselfly, one of the earliest species flying, and this year there was a very early one which we'll talk about in a minute. Working earlier. Right. There we go. So, 4 years of the survey, the current survey now being completed. Almost. There's still some species flying, but this late in the year, most species have finished flying. The large red damselfly would have finished a long time ago. The few species that are still flying, they're sort of starting to tail off. 2 years of surveying left. Current situation is I have records from 317 named observers, over 13,100 records in total. The previous survey, I think they had just short of 14,500 in the 6 years. So far, 32 species have been recorded, although one of them is still subject to acceptance. When I was out on some farmland earlier this year, 27th of June, I bumped into a vagrant emperor. There's been quite a few seen in the country this year. That would be the second Hertfordshire record, but it has to go to the National Rarities Committee for acceptance. Mostly the vagrant emperors that turn up are on the coast. I think this is, as far as I know, the only inland record this year. So we've got reasonable coverage so far. The grey squares are the tetrads, 2 kilometre squares, where we've got no records from so far. Yellow squares, there's only one observer who has submitted records, and then the deeper the colour, the more observers have been submitting records. This is more of a map of where people go than where the dragonflies are, and you can see people who are interested in dragonflies tend to go to some of the better sites in the county. So those sort of darker red squares, the little bottom here, they're sort of Amwell, Ryleys, Hertfordshire, Hanger. A lot of squares only had records submitted by single observers, but that doesn't really matter. If one observer is recording the dragonflies and damselflies in that tetrad, we can still achieve full coverage. The number of records, as you can see here, again, they're kind of concentrated in the areas where most observers will get. That's where I live, so we get quite a lot of records from down there. The Lee Valley is well covered. Few observers travelling out into the Stall, and the bottom of the southwest of the county around Maple Cross Local Data Reserve has quite a good coverage as well. There's one observer who's submitting a lot of records from down there. The number of species, it's kind of difficult to say whether this reflects more observers, meaning more species are found, or the observers go to where there are more species. It's probably a bit of both. But people who are interested in dragonflies go where more species have been seen, and by doing so they find additional species. So, back to the large red damselfly. We use this as an example of the sort of data we're trying to collect. It's an early flying species, emerging generally in Hertfordshire. The first records are in early April, around the 9th or 10th most years, and then they're flying through sort of May and June, starting to tail off during June. Sometimes we do have records into August, but nothing yet during the survey period that late. This year we did have a very early record, 25th of March, which was the first emerging dragonfly damselfly recorded in the country. That was sadly found dead. It was found inside someone's conservatory, but I have been in contact with the lady who found it, reported it, and she is certain that it wasn't there all winter. She's in the conservatory regularly. The tetrad maps that you see there, the red squares are where we've recorded or had records of large red damselfly this year, this survey period. The squares with the 4 little black dots in, they're where large red damselflies were recorded during the previous survey. One of the things that's been noticeable with most species is we're getting records in new tetrads. So there's squares, quite a lot of squares here where there were no records in the previous survey, but we're also finding that some tetrads which are otherwise fairly well covered seem to be absent, don't have the species anymore. That's partly due to changes in habitat, and it's probably partly due to the fact that no matter how much effort is put into a survey, there will always be some records that are missed. So the fact that there are the tetrads where they've been recorded this survey doesn't mean they weren't there the last survey. But if we can get a similar level of coverage, then we can get a good comparison and see whether species are increasing or decreasing. We're roughly 2/3 of the way through the survey period, so it's quite very approximate. It could be that all the tetrads that have got the species present have already been covered, but so far we've had records of large red damselfly from 85% of the total number of tetrads that the species were recorded from in 2005. So that suggests that they may be increasing. That's 159 tetrads so far, this survey compared to 188 in 2000 to 2005. 61 of those have been new tetrads for this species, with 90 tetrads missing the species despite them being recorded previously. As I said, we don't yet know whether those are we probably will never know whether the species is actually completely absent in those tetrads. We may have some more records from those in the next couple of years. And as far as the total number of records goes, for this species, we've got 63% of the total number of records from 2000 to 2005. So, roughly what I'd expect. Some of the species that have been recorded are new species. 11 species were recorded during the 2000 to 2005 survey. 5 of these had at least one historic record prior to 2000 in the county, but had then either they were only recorded as sort of wandering individuals, or they were in the county and they've then been lost. 6 of the species that we've recorded so far during this survey, though, were first recorded in the county after 2005. So there are new species moving into the county. One of these is the willow emerald damselfly. First arrived in, well, there were a couple of records of vagrants, but then they first really started to colonise the UK in 2008 when they reached the Suffolk coast, and they then spread from there down into Essex. Additional colonisations reached Kent, I believe the Isle of Wight and Sussex, and now they're spread over most of England, and they're sort of still spreading north, still spreading west. This is a species that flies quite late in the year, so I would still expect there to be some more records of this species, depending on the weather. They will fly, as you can see from the graph there, they will fly into November if the conditions stay suitable and there's no frosts. As far as the distribution goes, we've had records widespread from most of the county, and I expect some more of the gaps will be filled. So this is a species that now you could potentially find anywhere in Hertfordshire. First record in Hertfordshire was as recent as 2014. But we've already had 161 tetrads where the species has been recorded. And to put that into some context, so far only 4 other species have been recorded in more tetrads during the current survey. So willow emerald damselfly really has swept across the county in the last 10 years or so. A more recent one, well not more recent arrival, the first record of this one, the Lesser Emperor, was in 2006, the year after the previous Atlas survey. It did make it into the Atlas when they published it, because obviously the book takes a little bit of time to write after the survey's finished. But in just the last 3 or 4 years, really, this species has started to really spread. It's a sort of midsummer species, flies from June to August. Currently, you can see there have been records in the Lee Valley, Panshanger, Hillfield Park Reservoir. That was where the first record was, and that's where the species it seems to be most established in the county. And this year they've reached the Colne Valley, the reservoirs up near Tring. I think there was a record there in 2006 as well, but they're still present there. They probably are breeding in quite a few sites. This is a species that likes large lakes and reservoirs, so the smaller ponds drying out isn't really going to affect it. So first recorded, as I said, in 2006. 22 records tetrads so far during this survey. Notable increase in the last few years, and this spread seems likely to continue. Another species, the scarce blue-tailed damselfly, potentially isn't faring so well. There was one previous record from sort of 70 years ago, I think it was, in the county. But then they were discovered at Kingsmead in 2022, the first year of the survey. For the last 3 years, 2022, 2023, 2024, they were being recorded at Kingsmead with 2 generations a year. This year, I've received no records at all from there. And from speaking to people who have visited, I've not been there this year, but from speaking to people who have visited, the area where they were found was very dry very early on in the season. So it's possible that it was unsuitable for them and maybe any larvae in there didn't emerge. Hopefully though, there is other suitable habitat in that area, so hopefully there will be some somewhere around there, and when we do get some water they'll move back in to where they were and they'll be found again. They've also been found in the last couple of years in Ruislip, just outside Hertfordshire, and this year there was some found in Enfield, so there is a potential for them to turn up elsewhere. So we have to wait and see if we've lost those again or not. The more established species, most seem to be doing quite well. Standard demoiselle is one that most people have seen. If you're near any rivers, canals, they're quite numerous, quite easy to see. Quite a large damselfly, quite obvious as they're flying over the water. Quite a long flight period for most of the summer, and widespread. 90% of the total number of tetrads have been recorded in so far, so looking like they're going to probably exceed the previous survey total. 153 tetrads so far, 38 new tetrads, 56 missing. And the number of records, 156%. So they're not only seem to be we've been recording potentially in more tetrads, also in more larger numbers. Hairy dragonfly has done even better. This is a very early species, and at the time of the previous survey was mainly restricted to around the Lee Valley. It's the early flying, flies sort of through May and June. You can see that the previous records, mostly around the Lee Valley, a few up the Storm, a few scattered records elsewhere, but now they've spread to new areas all around the county. 53 tetrads so far, compared to 31 in 2000 to 2005, that's 171% of the total. 33 of those are new tetrads, and there's only 11 where they were recorded previously, where they haven't been recorded yet. Some of those we may find them. Over twice the number of records. So this is one species that is definitely doing well. There are only 3 species that seem to be struggling a lot. The emerald damselfly is one of these, or common emerald damselfly as it's sometimes called, not very common now. This is a species that generally breeds in ponds that dry out during the summer, but I think they're drying out potentially too quickly, so the larvae don't have time to grow and emerge. As you can see, there's quite a few squares there, tetrads where they've not been recorded, and there's not many where they have been recorded now. The actual figures have only been found in 27% of the total. That's 18 tetrads when there were so far, it's 67 previously. 8 new tetrads, 57 where they were previously found, where they haven't been found so far during this period. And the number of records is only 25% of the total number from the previous survey. So well below the 2/3 of the records that we might otherwise expect. brown hawker as well, very distinctive species, so it's unlikely to be being overlooked. Relatively long flight period over the summer, and a few just managed to keep flying into the autumn. Fairly widespread, but only now recording 44% of the total number of records, 44% total number of tetrads in 2005, no mistake there. 105 records tetrads so far, it was 240, so we are down there. Not many new tetrads, but a lot of missing tetrads. And some of those are ones that have had a lot of records during the, so far, during this current survey. Only 39% of the total number of records is known. Looking at all species, the new species on the left there, most are doing well. Obviously, they're new species in the county. The three at the bottom, there's just been a few records. They don't seem to have any established populations. The scarce blue-tailed did seem to establish a population, but then she died out. There's the more established species, 3 species potentially declining. The blue-tailed damselflies is the one I didn't mention. They're not much down, but potentially a little bit down. The orange ones, they're ones where I think the early indications are that their populations are probably stable, and the green ones are seemingly increasing. The paler green not increasing as much or not as well established as the species in the deeper green there. Just a quick mention of the red vein darter. This is a rare species in the county, but there were quite a few records this year. They reached several sites. It's a sort of eruptive species. Occasionally we get sort of immigrations from the continent, and this year there were quite a few recorded, including one in September, which is potentially locally emerged. This is a species that will turn up usually in late May or June, breed, and then a second generation will emerge later in the autumn. So, we're still after records. 2 more years, many records as we can get. Minimum details required. The species, we need to know what's being recorded. The date, when you recorded it. Where it was recorded, preferably a grid reference, but you can work with some other locations, what 3 words, things like that. And the observer's name. I said earlier we had 317 named observers. I've also got records, about 150, 160 records from unnamed observers, submitted via iNaturalist, where people put it in like a username, so we don't get a proper name. For a biological record, really we need a proper name, not just a username. So if you do use iNaturalist, you can, in the settings, you can set it so that if the records get put into iRecord, where they can go into the sort of national databases, you can have it put your proper name. Just a quick reminder of the areas where we still need records from. So if you do live or visit any of the grey areas, please get involved, see what you can record. A lot of times, even quite poor photographs can be used to identify the species. And how to contribute? Records can be submitted via the Hertfordshire Natural History Society website, via iRecord, or you can send details to me via email, dragonflies@HNHS.org. All I've got to say at the moment.